Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Code. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey, and I am so excited to be joined today by Ben Erwin. Ben, welcome to Coffee and Code.
Thank you. I love both coffee and code and Ashley Coffey.
It works out. It works out. Ben, you've been a long time individual who I've admired in this XR AI future space. You've done some incredible work in the field, and we're going to get into that. But I really want to help the audience understand you as a person and how you intersect with this world that we're in right now. So give us a little bit more about who you are, Ben.
Thank you. Well, my name is Ben Erwin, and I am the creator of the Polly's Immersive Awards. And 2 years ago, I co-founded the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences with Karen Alexander and Terry Schussler. And our vision is to bring public media to the immersive space.
And that's such an important mission right now. We're seeing the landscape of media changing consistently, and you really have been at the forefront of that with your background and where you are right now. You're joining us from New York City. I'm joining from Oklahoma, which I love technology can bring us together thousands of miles apart. But I really want to dive into your background, Ben. I really would consider you a internet frontiersman, so to speak. It's a big title there. So before we dive in, I want to ask you, since you often describe yourself as an internet frontiersman, what drew you into technology and what did the internet feel like in those early days?
I think that I was drawn into technology before the internet was really a thing. So I go back to the early '90s, and I got really good at spreadsheets and databases. And when the internet came along, I was at the time, believe it or not, of all things, horrible karma of running a telemarketing office for the hair club for men. And I was so bored that they made me an executive, and I rose up through the ranks in just a couple of years and found myself very well paid running an entire operation at 26 years old. And so this was when the internet was becoming a thing. And I said to myself, hey, well, one day everybody's going to need a website. And so I went out on my own in 1997, and I haven't been a W 2 ever since. And led to me getting better at database technologies and integrating them with websites, which led me to work at the United Nations, where I was a webmaster for 13 years in the humanitarian section. I worked for the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children in Armed Conflict, and later the Office for Sexual Violence and Conflict, and wound up at the New York Times doing data-driven interactives, at which point the web that I had worked on for almost 20 years at that point was becoming commoditized at the same time as I discovered XR. Saw the writing on the wall that the web that I was making my living off of was changing, and that sort of a new generation of technology was coming in. And that was 10 years ago already. So that was a pivot that I made. And the lessons that I learned along the way sort of helped form my thinking that I operate under right now. And in particular, I always tell the story of the tragedy of Flash, where a decade of my portfolio was not just deprecated, but completely expunged from the web, because Flash didn't just die. It was taken out of all browsers. So you cannot load a Flash experience even on the Wayback Machine. So I cannot load a SWF file that I have on my computer without hacking it, and all sorts of security warnings. So all that work and all the investment that my clients at the time made is lost. And this is something that I don't want to see happen to the metaverse. And that has sort of lit the fire behind the work that I do now.
So I want to ask you, looking back 3 decades later, what lessons from the early web still apply today, Ben?
Well, I think that it took a while for the early web didn't learn those lessons in a vacuum. It took the 2 decades hence to look back and see. And so, the campaign that I've been on is that this iteration of the web takes those lessons to heart and builds from it. And for better or for worse, I have been proven right in my advocacy for standards and interoperability. And what you see here with the death of all of these platforms is something that is somewhat inevitable. It's somewhat history repeating itself. And back in the 90s, we had what we called online services. And interestingly, like Prodigy and CompuServe sort of predate the web as we know it. And then AOL rose up and, the whole sending out CDs to install it. It's so quaint now that they did this, but they tried to say, okay, this is the web and we want you to experience it our way, and created walled gardens around the early web. And now we have a graveyard of those. We have a graveyard of formats like Flash, like real media. There's a whole bunch of them. And then when real standards take hold, like MP4 did, then it makes it possible for creators to publish once and distribute widely. And that is really the crux of the problem. Like, if we need to solve for something right now, it is that the immersive medium needs to make it easier and more economical for creators to publish the same way that they can publish video. And one thing that, I look at and I'm just sort of in awe was, we barely had, YouTube was just getting founded. It was a garage act 20 years ago. And then it got bought by Google. And then Flash got assassinated by Apple. And the next thing you know, YouTube is adopting H.264 and empowering creators to self-publish. And that was game changing. It sort of gave birth to the creator economy. And we can probably touch on what the state of the creator economy is now later.
Yeah.
But one thing that I would like to point out is, like, Mr. Beast, who I've never seen a single episode of, honestly. Like, I just
Neither
heard
have I.
about
I don't
Mr.
care.
Beast. Well, but here's an interesting factoid. Mr. Beast is starting a bank. A
What?
bank. A bank. Mr.
That's
Beast
doesn't seem
is
right.
starting a fucking bank.
That's crazy, dude. No way.
So, well, whether or not that succeeds, it just goes to show you that the money's there if you can build the audience. This is the same internet that Prodigy and CompuServe and AOL worked under, but it was built on the open web. And the open web, YouTube is a proprietary platform. Nothing wrong with that, but it monetizes things. And if it draws in a big enough audience and enough advertising, then it makes money. The word advertising is fine because, we've made peace with certain things when it comes to technology. And Ashley, I really admire your advocacy because you are always talking about the sort of ethical path, whether it be AI, whether it be, the way that the industry operates. I think that you endeavor to keep it honest. And I really appreciate that because we need to keep these conversations going. This is something that I try to keep as a staple in my work with Ombuds Person of the Year Award. But when it comes to the type of content that we have, it's great that we have a creator economy where a YouTuber can start a bank. But we also have seen public media as we knew it die. And so I'll end there so you can queue up the next question about that.
Well, Ben, first off, thank you. I will water those flowers. But two, that's another reason why I love what you've built with the Immersive Academy of Arts and Sciences. And being in New York City and actually, like, there is nothing more fulfilling and special than being surrounded by people who get it, who understand that this work is incredibly important and to do it ethically and to think open source as much as we can, right? In a community aspect, I feel like is priceless. And what you've built there is super special. So I encourage everyone that's listening to check out the Immersive Academy of Arts and Sciences because it's something unique that I think has a huge competitive advantage in this new creator economy, which is like a good segue. And so I want to talk about the creator economy with you and what are your reactions right now?
Well, when I hear the words creator economy, and I actually made a meme that was on my deck slide, MIT Reality Hack, and it's a homage to the Twilight Zone for the
Nice.
1963 episode To Serve Man. Where, the guy's on a spaceship and they sort of tell the story of how the aliens came down and presented a book and they translated it and they figured out the title said To Serve Man. And then when they finally crack what it means, it's a cookbook. And so it's like, it's a cookbook is what I think when I hear the creator economy, because very often, Mr. Beast aside, the creator economy is very exploitative and extractive. Like, take the music industry. The music industry has been a joke with pay to play for decades. When I was coming out of high school, my aspiration was to be an artist manager, and so I studied all the sort of old school stories of when the music industry was forming and how the record labels started up and how radio became a thing, and pay to play with payola. They used to pay the DJs to play the songs, and the songs became hits, and it was all sort of like a non-virtuous cycle of that. And now we have the streaming revolution came in, which even further shrunk the royalties. Like, kids today don't even know what it's like to buy an album and listen to every song in order. And that's fine. Like, I don't listen to songs in order either. I listen to Pandora and let it introduce things for me. But streaming isn't like a choice anymore. Like, streaming is how you consume music now. You can still order CDs, but who actually runs a CD player anymore? You can download MP3 albums, but most people are lazy and turn on Spotify. And so, back to the creator economy, like, the music industry is one example of it. But also, when you talk about the modern tech stack, whether it be, Web3 is a whole rabbit hole we could go down to, and I don't want to necessarily, but that's,
It could be another episode.
yeah. And the way that creators don't have a clear path to promotion and monetization and publishing of their work in a way that isn't exploitative. And this isn't an easy problem to solve. And I don't necessarily think that I have the answer. But when it comes to, we're talking about advertising and that creator economy, non-commercial content and educational content. Everybody's like, XR is game changing, like immersive education. It's like they're a match made in heaven. Yes, that is absolutely true. And, we keep saying that, but we have to really live it in terms of the content that we produce. And I do think that the years that we've just experienced with the rise of the XR, there were several sort of like ups and downs in XR. It was like, 2016, 2017, and then it kind of went into another winter, and then COVID came, and then, the metaverse, and now like sitting at the bottom of the trough of disillusionment, looking up, going,
Yep.
yeah, going, what happened? And it's like all these walled gardens without interoperable standards that don't want to share their audience with each other, have made it so that the creators don't have an economy, that the publishing, there's hasn't been a legitimate way to build audience, to monetize the platforms, and thus the death of all these platforms. And it is not something that is fixable by history repeating itself again. And it just did. The whole CompuServe Prodigy AOL analogy begats the alt space, rec room, Horizon World spatial analogy, and here we are again. But it's really the protocol layer of the web itself, which is a permissionless publishing platform that enables people to do this. So one thing to point out is that we've had a public commons for all previous forms of media until recently. So books and print had libraries. And then when TV and radio came up, actually Japan and England had it in the early days of radio. It took until the late 60s and past the dawn of television for the United States to create a public media enterprise with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS and
CPB.
NPR. Yeah. And the CPB sadly died last year of
I
politics.
know. I know. It was
And, I
heartbreaking.
could go off on a rant about how authoritarian fascists don't like truth, thus have it in for public media, but people know that already. But the problem is that we have seen the public media infrastructure that we had that was built for terrestrial broadcasts, TV and radio, that adapted to the web, that adapted to streaming, get defunded. And so there's still philanthropists covering it. There's still viewers like you, the individual donors, keeping it funded. But that works great in major markets like I live in New York City with Channel 13, PBS. and or San Francisco, but perhaps where you live in Oklahoma City, that the market doesn't have as much capitalization locally to be able to support that. But the web has brought on a different distribution infrastructure and a different economy than terrestrial analog broadcast did. So we have to just keep that in mind when we're building an infrastructure that's built on the web. But with the death of the CPB, this on one hand is tragic because it gutted government funding. And first, there was an executive order that had it in for this, but Congress actually authorizes the funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And they didn't just stop it, they actually rescinded, they clawed back the 2 years of funding in front of it. So the
Just
2026 and
awful.
2027 money that had already been approved from a previous budget was taken back so that it died sooner than later. And then, you have horrible things like, late night talk shows under attack and getting canceled, not just the host getting fired. And then you have things like the takeover of 60 Minutes, like what they call that is capture, like when government captures media outlets as a avenue to become a propaganda mouthpiece.
That's fascism for
This
you.
It is. And this is what we're seeing with what just happened with 60 Minutes. Like the headline of the week is Scott Pelley got fired. And, listen to what Scott Pelley had to say about that because, that's not up to me to comment on. Listen to what he had to say because he's there on the inside and he's seeing the new head of a CBS News appoint these lackeys to help form that public opinion. And the toxic aftermath of 30 years of Fox News and what that has done to the government.
And society.
I'm not trying to be political here. I'm not trying to be partisan here because I'm not a partisan person, but facts are facts and the truth is the truth. And when the truth is under fire, we really have a problem. And so, there's two pieces to the sort of public media category. First of all, there's non-commercial. Second, there is educational. But at its core, public media has sort of been the steward and the guardian of objective reporting. And this is what we're losing. This is what is under attack. This is what we as a society, not just here in the United States, but globally, have to aspire to reclaim. And I think that the medium is the opportunity for all this public media, public interest programming to rise from the ashes and of the CPB and all of the gutting of the funding that has come before it. And it's not just in the United States, like the things are under attack, but you also have sort of counterpoints to this narrative, which like the BBC is under attack in Britain because it's paid for with taxes. But then you have the Netflix coming in and wanting to carry the BBC and Netflix and the BBC saying, great, pay us. And Netflix is like, okay, here you go. So like there are ways that and also like, let's look at the BBC as an exporter of content. And you look at PBS as an importer of content. Like a lot of the great stuff you see on PBS is imported from the BBC. And the same thing, NHK, also 100 years old from Japan, exporting their content. So there's a lot of lessons, and this is what I've been studying, and it has only reaffirmed my original assertion that immersive needs public media. And that's what I'm going to be talking about at AWE is inventing global immersive public media, because we don't have it. And I'm not saying that I'm going to invent it. I'm calling for it to be invented.
Yeah, you're creating a signal in the community to say, I'm doing this. Do you want to join in? Which I'm glad that you're going to be going to Augmented World Expo in Long Beach in just a couple of weeks. We're recording now in the beginning of June, but we'll be headed there June 15th to the 18th. And I'm really excited to hear your talk, Ben. I'm always looking forward to your talks. And I love how other people are too, that when people get there, there's this energy of, all right, this is the talk I want to go to. This is the talk I need to go to, and I need to make sure. And it's always, I'm going to Ben Erwin's talk. So it's always a
Thank you.
high excitement. So I'm really excited to hear that. And this is the 6th consecutive year that you've been speaking at Augmented World Expo, which is really exciting. This will be my 5th year attending. Spoken for 3 years, but sometimes I just like attending. I just like absorbing things from people like you. So this is a good kind of a transition question here for you. At what point did you realize that immersive web needed its own advocates, community leaders, and awards program?
Well, that's a whole sort of story unto itself, and one that I love to regale because I love the people in the story, and it's so back when the pandemic started, I had sort of spent the previous 3 years before that, 2017, 18, 19, studying the medium, and it was still very early days. Having come out of the web, I didn't personally rush to adopt Unity as the next platform I wanted to develop. And as a matter of fact, I was kind of aging out of being a full-time developer as it was. So, part of my reinvention was knowing that I wasn't going to compete with 24-year-olds coding JavaScript by hand. Little did I know that Claude would come along and do it for me, and that all the years that I learned to code would be very useful because you can't really use AI effectively unless you know what you're doing in the first place.
Yes.
So, AI has made me a better writer, it's made me a better coder, but, AI aside, this study that I did those first 3 years, just I was waiting for the web to come to this. And during the pandemic, Julie Smithson, Terry Schuessler, and I did a industry resource guide called XR Collaboration. And later, Karen Alexander joined that team. And many years down the road, Terry and Karen and I formed the academy. It was that relationship that formed that was sort of like the seed of everything that grew out of it since then. And so, like, I came up with the idea for the polys in the fall of 2020. And Julie and I had already become friends, and I invited her to become host. Sophia and I had worked together on Ready Player Golf, and I invited her to become the red carpet host. And Julie and Sophia hosted the Polys for its first 5 years till you took over the red carpet this year, Ashley, and did a
Which is an
fantastic job.
honor. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you did an amazing job, and I'm so excited that you're part of this team now. But the moment that we were in at the end of 2020, Julie and Karen and Sophia created XR Women that November of 2020. And that has grown massively into its own thing. It's a worldwide organization with a large membership, and it's empowering women professionals. And so, I'm so proud of what they did. And I've been nothing but a bystander and an ally and a friend to these people, but I really admire that sort of a path that they've been blazing with XR Women. And the Polys began in 2021,
Okay.
and the Polys begat the WebXR Developer Summit, which went so well where we said, hey, well, let's do a business and a design summit. And Julie became the co-host of these summits. Karen joined the team, and the business summit introduced me to Neil Trevitt. And Neil Trevitt said, it'll take a constellation of standards to achieve the open metaverse. And I was just, those there are some words.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, Neil, well, what we need is a meta Davos. And so the idea was to bring together industry leaders in what I called an international politics format. It's really a symposium, like an online symposium of thought leaders, giving statements in support of standards and interoperability. And we held Meta Davos on October 29th, 2021, which was the day after Mark Zuckerberg rebranded Facebook as Meta. And in that video where he's launching Meta, he says, oh, it'll be all interoperable standards, and people will be able to take their digital goods from one place to another. And a couple of things happened. First of all, the whole hype around the metaverse, which had swollen up like a balloon, popped. And they were like, it's the metaverse anymore. You're naming yourself Meta. And, other companies like Apple were like, we're never going to call it the metaverse. So get over it. And I personally still hold on to the term metaverse. I don't care. But the backlash of that, and also just sort of an interesting fact that I observed that happened 5 days later, November 5th. Like, if you go to the coin market cap and look at the crypto total market value timeline, and you look at that last bull run peak, or the 2021 one, and it's 5 days after that, November 5th. And then the NFT bubble burst, and the whole, the whales ate the plankton, and the bear market began again. And this is very emblematic of, these hype cycles that we get sucked into. And so that first episode, Meta Davos, we talked to the good people at the World Economic Forum a couple of days later, and we love what you're doing. Just don't call it Meta Davos. So I
Yeah.
said, okay, we'll call it Meta Traversal. And that first episode went so well, we did a second and a third within 2 months. And Julie joined as co-host of Meta Traversal at that third episode. And as we were preparing for the fourth one, we get on with, so Neil, Evo Haining, Terry, and I founded Meta Traversal. And Neil was at the meeting for the fourth, which we were having a panel. And he said, well, I'm starting something, and it's not conflicting or competitive with it. It's very complementary, and it's called the Metaverse Standards Forum. And so what we were working on there, we had that fourth one in March, and the fifth one was a stage play at AWE 2022, where
I
we had a
remember
cast of
that.
17 led by Sophia Mashasha, narrated by Terry. And it was a 3-act play with 3 scenes per act and a cast of 17 industry leaders talking about standards and interoperability, called Meta Traversal: A Day in the Life. And it was after that, so Meta Traversals now had a total of 18 episodes, and 7 of them to date were portal crawls, and one was a portal crawl town hall where we talked about it as practitioners putting on our headsets, going into virtual worlds, and actually understanding the friction of going between the worlds. And the first 5 of them were nothing but WebXR. And then when we finally introduced the native app, I guess it was 5 that we did the first native app hops. That friction was automatic. It was there. We had to exit. The Engage is the only platform that through only the Meta API you can do that. And so there's a couple of things, yay for Engage and the Meta API, but it also tells us that why don't we have this everywhere? Why isn't there an API that works across all platforms? Why do you need to have an OS level interoperability thing when it could work? Of course, the OS is always going to have the last word. But if you're only able to do this on one OS, it's like when we live in the world of PCs and you have Windows and Mac and Android and iOS and all of these. The same thing goes with Android XR, Horizon OS. That layer needs to support protocols that you can go between. Like, what if we couldn't share files with our Mac and PC? Was once the case, but people were like, but I own a Mac and a PC. Can't I network them, please? It's a no-brainer that these things should be interoperable. So Meta Traversal campaign for interoperability, and Ready Player Golf kept going. So Sophia and I did that first one in 2020. In 2025, we did Ready Player Golf 6, and we've been raising money for a program by a guy named James Origo, who brings VR to kids with terminal cancer in hospitals to give them experiences. So that's been sort of like our sort of public service feel good thing. But Meta Traversal and Ready Player Golf were never intended to make money. And that was why that was a no-brainer, that it was like, hey, let's form a nonprofit corporation and adopt those as programs. And so those 2 programs are there. And what I'm proposing to the industry through my talk is that we take things in the direction of public media. So that's the sort of like the how we got here, jumping over a lot of details, but the important stuff is there in that story I just told.
I love that. Lots of good sound bites that I'll be able to pull from that I think people will be very interested in listening to. And this is a good segue because your AWE talk coming up is called Why Open Wins. Why Open Wins. So I wanted to ask you
Well,
if
that
you
was the
had
2 years ago one. The one that's
okay,
coming
what's
up is Inventing Global Immersive Public Media. 2 years ago was Why Open Wins. Last year was Choosing a Durable Immersive 3D Stack. And this was kind of originally supposed to be about distribution. That was going to be my third one, was about distribution. But I went so far down the distribution rabbit hole that I was like, I'm just going to focus on public media for immersive.
I love it. That makes sense. That makes sense. I'm curious if if you had 5 minutes with every XR founder today, what would you want them to understand around what you're trying to communicate with your talk?
Well, that's a good one. Well, so first of all, the standards and interoperability part is a given, that you have everything to gain and nothing to lose by making your platform accessible to the widest audiences possible. I would say choose open platforms for, and open publishing tools. And I think that one of the most detrimental choices that founders and venture capitalists have made hand in hand looking for a quick ROI and trying to own the space, which was unrealistic, is to try to own both the publishing and the output. So, like when you have a platform that a proprietary tool publishes proprietarily and the hosting is integrated with that, that's where the problem lies. And what have you seen is platforms who have done that. You do the math. Who died is there are platforms that are still doing this, but I think that as a startup, choosing what platform you use, don't choose one of those platforms. Choose a platform that publishes to open standards and that you can host yourself, because if that platform dies, and they do, so does your content, so does your investment, so does your client's investment, so does the creator portfolio, all get hurt as a result of that. And so I would say make better choices. And I think that it's very interesting when you look at the case of Unity, because Unity is, on one hand, an industry standard publishing platform that publishes to all the OSs via SDKs, and that's a good thing. But what has been, and is frankly a time bomb waiting to go off, is that you're locked into these time-based prefabs like a 2019 or 2021 or a 2022 edition of it, and that's
Mhm.
going to cause pain to
So much
update.
pain.
And this is pain that we can and should try to avoid going forward. And so I think that, for certain platforms that have their, like the Unity prefabs are locked into this so that you can depend on them. And I understand why they were done that way then. But the whole point of my talk last year, choosing a durable immersive 3D stack, is, will you still be able to open this file in 20 years? And
Which is so
that
important.
that matters. That matters to every link in the chain. And if we don't make these choices where, and this is a choice for Unity to make, with Unity 6 or Unity 7 or whatever, with, to have these native platforms. And, just as a little sort of nugget from last year's talk, take the FBX file format, which is native to Unity. It's been around, it's battle tested, so much is natively integrated to FBX. FBX is kind of like Father Time versus, the OpenUSD is the baby new year, and it's just like there is a sort of changing of the guard that's going on, but Unity has yet, like OpenUSD isn't fully baked yet. And Autodesk was the original author of the FBX format,
Mhm.
or it acquired it, adopted it, and FBX. So until we're natively authoring using that, deploying using GLTF or whatever it's sort of like GLTF is the MP4 and USD, OpenUSD, which isn't out yet. Mindful of the fact that it is in the works, it is not here, is the dot move of that. And so like we still have had, MP4 and dot move for a long time. They are a constant. You can publish to them. You can rely that you will be able to open them in the future. This is the type of thinking that we need to have when we evaluate the choices of the platform. So that is what I would tell to these startups: is don't try to own the stack. Choose tools that you
Yes.
can publish and distribute widely. Don't go with people who own the hosting and have a black box secret sauce that could just one day go away and take your investment with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is my first taste of what you're discussing was in 2018. I became an emerging technologies librarian, and the discussion at the time in the academic community was creating a standard for 3D data. Because at the time, 3D was becoming really important because 3D scanning and photogrammetry was really starting to become robust, i.e., the ability to create digital realistic scans of objects and be able to study them and not have to injure them or whatever. And no one can agree on it. And I remember we built a Unity program with the Oculus Rift, and at the time NASA launched their solar system, like the actual data of the solar system, and you could import it into a 3D environment at scale and move around it. And that was so cool. We imported it in, we built it in a model, and then of course a few years later we couldn't get to it because of the Unity problem. You have to update all of the Unity to be able to get it to function. So I just think this is an important conversation for the future and for everyone to have an understanding of how important this is. So thank you for articulating that really well.
No, my pleasure. And one thing I do want to say about, as long as you're talking about 3D formats and data, I want to give props to the Kronos Group, which Neil Trevitt is both the president of the Kronos Group and the founder of this, but they're have royalty free. So like this is really important is the royalty free aspect of OpenXR. You don't have this extractive nature going on where you have royalties. Like OpenXR has become fundamental to the stack. But then, once you have all of their APIs, OpenGL, Vulkan, and these are ones that run on different operating systems. WebGL grew up under the Kronos Group and is now evolved into WebGPU under the W3C. And the GLTF format was, fostered and remains under the stewardship of the Kronos Group. These and other APIs that are fundamental to the ecosystem are all royalty free through the Kronos Group. So, they deserve a huge debt of gratitude for helping to unify the 3D community. And as an outlier, once again, we have Apple. And Apple is very successful at owning the whole stack. And, I am a full-on Apple Borg. Like I don't own a Vision Pro yet, just because I, thought it would become a very expensive decoration and I would have been proven right.
Yeah.
But I'm talking to you on a Mac. I have earbuds in. I've got an Apple Watch. I've got an
Yep.
iPhone. And they're reliable. Reliability is very important. But I also think that Steve Jobs, in his assassination of Flash, took HTML and JavaScript, the open standards, and he was right. Flash did have to go. It hurt. It hurts that I can't even open it anymore. I think that they really should fix that.
I agree.
But the idea that open standards one was adopted by Apple, and Apple supporting WebXR, Apple supporting WebGPU, Apple supporting WebAssembly, WASM, that talks directly from the browser to the CPU, making things more faster and better experiences. But Apple has Metal and Swift and things. So like their whole Vision OS is very outside of that Kronos Group family of things that are integrated into the other systems. So that divide is going to remain. But the same thing, it's the universe seems to want to have a Pepsi and Coke or McDonald's and Burger King.
All right, Ben, when we look back 10 years from now, what will we say was happening right now that most people missed?
Ooh, that's a good one that most people missed.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there is a big opportunity to get in front of this technological revolution. And for the people that have been in it for 10 years and have been like, there's been a lot of sort of self doubt and self searching and, empty bank accounts when it comes to people's investment in this technology. And the immersive medium and the adoption of 3D technologies is as inevitable as the web itself, as inevitable as the mobile phone, as inevitable as social media, as inevitable as being able to stream high resolution video on a moving train. It's these history guarantees us that as technology advances, it will shrink. The form factor shrinks, the battery life increases, the connectivity becomes more rapid and powerful. And when we're able to beat the formidable scientific challenges of taking, the light, heat, power, and weight of what it takes to put a comfortable all day wearable device on your face. All we need to do is turn to the gateway drug that we call AI glasses today as proof. Because, right now, Sonia Haskins, I got to give her credit for using the term HUD which is
Heads up display.
heads up display. It's like when you see the speedometer projected onto your windshield, that's a heads up display. Like when you have this sort of like little projection there, but it's like a 2D thing. And it's like, okay, great. So I have this information being displayed on this, but when this is full on interactive 3D, and you can dim out the room, kind of like the Magic Leap 2, they had it right with, has a lower form factor. You can dim out the room if you want to go VR, but the default position is AR or MR type of experience. But the thing that we're unlocking with immersive is 3D. And the reason that social XR is so powerful is because it embodies people to share a space and a moment of time. And I think that, I'm super proud of my wife, Helen, who is the creator of the Foremothers Cafe. And her sort of campaign has been, there are no borders in the metaverse. And indeed, the 2D web has taken us into a world where we sort of take for granted the multinational, like instantaneous, like I can email back and forth to most countries in the world. I can video conference back and forth with most countries in the world. But when you have a shared space like Helen's the Foremothers Cafe, where, just yesterday, her just weekly thing there were 7 people there and they were all from different countries.
I love that
And,
so much. I love that.
and that's a beautiful thing.
And it
That brings humanity closer together. And that's the point.
But it takes a
And
special
that's why
person to be able to do it too. Helen is a brilliant person at being able to bring in different cultures together and have a meaningful conversation. So I want to give her flowers for that because that's something that's not easy to do.
it isn't easy, and it is really, really powerful. And she just celebrated her 4th anniversary. But, this is, we talk about being pioneering in this day and age, but yeah, it's like 10 years hence, what we're going to look back at is the sort of normalization of the things that we've been talking about for the last 10 years. And, so in 2036, which it's crazy to think that 2036 is only 10 years away. And, the another one of the quotes that I hold on to is Jensen Huang on September 3rd, 2020, launching the NVIDIA RTX 3000 series from his kitchen, said, in 20 years, homes will have holodecks. And I was like, wow, it was like that one stayed with me before I was able to like dig up the video and preserve the quote. And he didn't say what a holodeck would look like 20 years from now. But last year I went to Tokyo, and Masahiro Yamaguchi and Ako from Stiley took me to their VR moon cruise experience at the Tokyo Dome. And I went through this whole thing. I went to the moon. Who gets to go to the moon?
So cool.
I got to see an Earth eclipse on the moon. This is
Wow.
awesome. And at the end, I was able, like, it was a full location based experience where I was able to grab a banister. And they, by the way, have released an open source SDK for LBE, and kudos for them for open sourcing it. But I peeked out from underneath the Pico headset that I was going into this experience with, and there were what they call April tags on the wall, which are those like checkerboard QR code looking type of things that you see on mocap suits.
Yes.
And so you see these on the walls, and that's the friggin' holodeck. It's like I was on a holodeck in 2025. Alex Colomb of Agile Lens, actually, he made a post today about his holodeck helping to raise like $750 million for his real estate company in Austin. It's like, and so it's like holodecks may be, early and primitive right now and need heavy headsets by comparison to what we'll have. But, if maybe beyond the valley of, capturing, solving light, heat, weight, and power for all day wearable headsets. On the other side of that, maybe we can solve volumetric projection and actually have headset free holodecks that we can step into. But this point that I'm making here is that kids need to learn 3D technologies now. If you want to be a creator and you're coming out of the 2D space, onboarding to 3D isn't just adding a Z-axis to things. It's a whole different way of conceiving of content because you're inside of it. That's why I choose the word immersive, and that's why I like the word experiential, because it is doesn't have a frame. You can always frame the content, but if you go immersive first, then you can frame that later, but you're actually inside of a world. So building worlds, building 3D assets that can be experienced is a boat to not miss right now. And that's the core of my answer to your question.
I love that. That's really robust, and I feel like people will be able to resonate with that. Now, this is coming to the end of our conversation because we could have this a beautiful conversation for hours, and I want to continue it when we're in AWE with some little bites. But throughout your career, Ben, you've consistently championed open systems over closed systems. And when you look at AI, XR, and the future of the internet, do you think we're repeating the browser wars all over again?
Well, I call myself a veteran of the browser wars. It's like, I hear the Blue Oyster Cult song in my head, veteran of a thousand psychic wars, a thousand browser wars. And one of the reasons that I have been championing open systems is because that is a history that I do not want to repeat itself. There is life I will never get back for nights I stayed up trying to solve bugs for a dead browser called Internet Explorer 6 that was the torment of untold developers, and that cost is something that should not become a burden of this. And I think that Google deserves a tremendous amount of credit for coming up with Chromium Core, which is the ubiquitous core of all these browsers. Sadly, like even though it's open source, Firefox didn't implement it. And Firefox probably lost a lot of users. Love Mozilla, love Firefox and everything that they stand for, but their rendering core was a fail and it didn't perform as well. And so people didn't stay with it. I didn't stay with it. I use Brave, which is like Chrome without the surveillance capitalism. But even Internet Explorer uses Chromium as a core, like Internet Explorer all the way through version 11 until they killed it, was the bane of every developer's existence. It was, only like 3 and 4 were actually like legit targets where that had enough. It was the king of the market share back then. But after that, when Firefox came in, it was always, having to test for these multiple platforms. And, we still have this today with WebKit and Apple, like even Chrome on an iOS devices using WebKit. So like even Chrome has to do that. And I'm just like, stop. Like, it's okay for us to have like one rendering core to rule them all if people are publishing to the same platform. So I think that, we do need more unification when it comes to these like sort of core technologies for the sake of developers, for the sake of open publishing, and for the sake of the growth of the entire industry.
Wow, that's good. I like that a lot. Now, if listeners remember one thing today from our conversation, what would you want that to be?
I would probably circle back to that point that I made about what you would tell developers
Hmm.
is don't choose technology stacks that own both the creator tool and the export. If you cannot host it yourself, you are using the wrong stack. If you cannot export that file, doesn't matter what the file format you export it is. If you cannot export it and move it and host it where you want to do, then do not give that company your business. Give the company's business. And like I'm an Adobe user, have been for, since the beginning. But, even when Adobe pioneered the subscription model, which, is tiresome,
Oh,
and subscription fatigue and the lock-in involved with that. And it's somewhat of an honest lock-in where you can use Adobe to save a JPEG, to save a PNG, to save an MP4, to save a .move. And even though you can't open your source file if you stop your subscription, you can still take that file and you own it for life. And that's the fundamental right there is when you publish a file, you own that file. You can share that file anywhere. And if a platform that produces it goes away, your content doesn't. And that's what happened to me with Flash.
mm. History repeats itself over and over again. And
But we try to do better, don't we?
we try. You reminded me of Google Tilt Brush. And I remember we did a competition at the library for like, who can create the coolest Google Tilt Brush, art. I remember trying to get that out of Google Tilt Brush, and that taught me a really valuable lesson that day. And now we can't get that
Yeah.
stuff out, and it's like, what's the point? So what I'm getting at here is I think we've gotten away from the ownership conversation, and I think that kind of started with the convergence from physical media to digital media, i.e., CDs, vinyl. I'm not the typical person. I still have CDs. I still listen to vinyl because I love music. But I realize that's not everyone. But I think to myself, for example, Twin Peaks, David Lynch, freaking love it. Some of my favorite content. My husband and I like to do rewatches every now and then, and we decided to start a rewatch for like our fifth time last night. And I had to tell him, I was like, look, this is not available anywhere. They pulled it because Showtime just wanted to pull it from everything. So unless you have the DVD box set or a Plex server, you can't find that anywhere. And I asked him, I go, do you think if we left our house right now and went to all the stores within a 10-mile radius of us, could we find a DVD of Twin Peaks season one? And he was like, absolutely not. So I just think about this ownership conversation, and it always just eats at me at the core of, can we ever get back to it? Because clearly subscription models are just not working for everyone. Same thing with streaming. We started with channels and HBO. We moved to like Netflix, which is awesome. And now it's back into the same thing where we have 15 million streaming services and we can't find that one thing that we're looking for, but we're paying hundreds of dollars. I've had it with that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think that there's an upside and a downside to it. But when it comes to the freedom of choice, and it's only what is available when, if you have a subscription to that particular whoever owns that franchise, if they are actually showing it, because they don't have all the movies all the time or all the TV shows, so you don't have that choice persistently of what you want to do. And that's a whole nother sort of thing, as far as the way that studios make decisions about what, how they serve their content. Certainly, that is their purview, their right to do that. Is it good for the consumer? When it becomes extractive to the consumer's pocket to do that. And, I do miss owning things. I think that that's one of the things that's awesome with Walkabout Golf is you buy a course. You don't rent a course. You pay for the app and you pay for your courses, and that as long as Walkabout servers are up, you can always use the courses that you pay for. It's not a subscription based thing to do that. So, kudos for them for keeping it alive in the immersive era. And they're a good example of thwarting what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see what happens and converges into the future here. And yeah, it's just something for us to continue the conversation for. Now, I'm curious. So if people are listening and they want to support the Immersive Academy of Arts and Sciences or check out the Four Mothers Cafe that Helen is doing, where can we find more information? Where can people follow you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. That's
Okay.
my sort of primary social media, linkedin.com/in, which everybody's like /in, /Power Simple. And
Put that in
Power
the show
Simple is
notes.
my company and my handle. So that's where you can find me on LinkedIn. Helen, the fourmotherscafe.com, that has all the information that you need about that. But her Engage World, the Four Mothers Cafe, is persistent, and you can just go to 2A0 capital K6 as a session ID anytime you want. And if you reach out to Helen, maybe she'll make an appointment and give you a tour personally.
That's so cool. I'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes. That way, if someone's listening, wants to take that next step into this journey of, convergence, I would say, of technology, then the door is open no matter what. It's always on. That's what I love about this technology. It's always on no matter where you are in the world. It can connect us. And I think that's something really special.
That's why we're in it. That's
That's
why
why we're in it.
yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you wear a lot of hats. You do so many things and you've contributed so much to the community already
Thank
that
you.
I can't even imagine what the next like 10 years is going to be with the legacy that you're creating and furthering in this space that is incredibly important. So thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you. And academyimmersive.org is getting a relaunch soon, and that will have all the information. And, there's stuff that is in the works that will be revealed. But, in general, the thrust of my work right now is around evolving the immersive medium into the public media space on a global level, not just sort of a national defunded thing. Or, I
Mhm,
want the philanthropists to pay for it.
mhm. Yeah. I like that. I like that. Kind of shifting the world a little bit. What a time to be alive,
We,
right?
there are $12 trillion corporations on the planet right now, 12 and counting.
Yeah, looking at
And,
Anthropic and SpaceX going IPO. Jeez.
well, I mean, it's money. Like when I was a kid, the $6 million man, like the $6 million just seems so quaint right now, and the what was once an unimaginable amount of money. So money just doesn't even have a meaning like it used to when we're dealing with 4 trillion corporations, and this. But let's build a global economy that takes care of everybody and educates everybody and isn't necessarily so extractive.
I mean, it's the build with, not for. Wow, imagine that. That's amazing. Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking time to come on Coffee and Code. I definitely want to continue the conversation, maybe after
Yeah.
AWE.
Well, I mean, it's you go for the people, of course, the talk, but it's really it's an anchor every year that brings this community together, and it's so important. I have no regrets. I look forward to it all year long, and this time of year is where I work on the talk. But lastly, I just want to thank you, Ashley, for doing this and having me on the show. But having a show, first of all, you're killing it. Your work is really important, and I hope you continue to grow it because it's essential to keep these conversations going. And you're one of the few people that is doing it in a intellectually honest way.
Thank you so much for that. I needed to hear that because I've been doing this for 6 years. This will be my fifth year AWE, third year of me paying it for myself. And because I love that community so much that I have committed that I will make sure that I go there every single year, no matter what it takes, because that community is so important to me. So hopefully people can hear that and feel the passion in what we're saying and join us for a fun adventure because it's not just a week, it becomes a ecosystem of community, which is so valuable in this day and age of separation and friction and fascism. We just need more community and honesty. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's a good note to end on. All right. Thank you everyone for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes and you can follow Ben and stay tuned for our next episode. This is Ashley Coffey signing off for Coffee and Code. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Coffee and Code. Your support means everything, so be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube for more insights, updates, and behind the scenes content. Stay curious, stay informed. Until next time, stay hydrated and do something nice for someone.